The Dunning-Kruger effect is often associated with this graph, but in reality it is a gross misrepresentation. The effect has been retold so many times that it often doesn't actually reflect what the original study meant, which is ironic considering the context. The Dunning-Kruger effect comes from a study by David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999, where they examined the performance and self-assessment of undergraduate students in logical reasoning, English grammar, and humor. They asked the students to estimate how they performed on these tests relative to their peers by guessing their percentile rank. They then split these people into 4 quartiles based on their actual performance percentile and compared it to their perceived performance percentile. They found that the average perceived percentile in every quartile exceeded the actual average. People also tended to overestimate their ability relative to their peers, and the overestimation was largest for the lowest performing quartile. And this pattern is the Dunning-Kruger effect, that poorer performers tend to give overly positive assessments of their ability, while high performers may underestimate theirs. This effect is reduced when we take a look at the raw scores of the tests, showing that people are usually less accurate when assessing how well they did compared to their relative peer group. Along with the famous graph, there is another pop culture understanding of the effect, that it is about stupid people not realizing that they are stupid. But instead, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't based on intelligence, but rather on skills in specific domains. The Dunning-Kruger effect also doesn't imply that all incompetent people fail to realize their incompetence. They suggest some domains may be more prone to this effect than others. They also added that usually people need to have a minimal threshold of knowledge, theory, or experience of that domain, and that minimal understanding might lead them to a false belief that they are more competent than they actually are. Otherwise, people usually don't have a problem identifying their lack of skill in something they know nothing about. In conclusion, they propose that incompetence not only causes poor performance, but also the inability to recognize their poor performance, and that a way to make people realize their incompetence is by making them more competent, which they deemed a paradox because once they gained the skills to recognize their incompetence, they were no longer incompetent.
A few months ago, I went on the internet, and this is an internet meme, and basically looked at the first 20 images you get if you Google Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, you've seen the main Dunning-Kruger graph, so you know what it looks like. And here are the first 20 illustrations you get. How many of them look like anything that we talked about in our original research? I'll tell you, 3 of the 20 are. People are talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect, but what they're talking about is entirely something different. Actually, what they get is something that's actually more interesting than what we ever did. I mean, seriously, what they've done is they've changed it over to be about being inexperienced, right? To be naive, if you will. So basically what happens is you start something and you know nothing, and you know nothing. But then suddenly your confidence in what you do ratchets up to the peak of Mount Stupid. Because your confidence rises much more quickly than you actually learn things. But you keep getting things wrong, and thus you fall into the valley of despair between encountering the slope of enlightenment and hitting the plateau of stability. And I kind of go, I wish I had done that. And I wish that were the Dunning-Kruger effect. But it's not the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's unethical to let this go as people thinking this is the Dunning-Kruger effect. So what do you do with that situation? Well, what we decided to do was the most ethical thing we could come up with, which was basically to steal this idea and test it.
So they actually tested whether this stupid idea has any merit to it, and they indeed found some evidence for it. So this graph may depict a real effect, but it is not the Dunning-Kruger effect, and nor is it this extreme. It is also important to mention that there is a lot of criticism about the Dunning-Kruger effect. Critics argue that much of the classic Dunning-Kruger effect is a statistical artifact rather than a psychological effect. 2 important factors are the above average effect, a cognitive bias where people overestimate their abilities compared to others, and regression to the mean. When 2 measures aren't perfectly correlated, extreme scores on one measure tend to be less extreme on the other measure. So if a person with low actual performance is selected, their perceived performance tends to be higher. Many other studies across domains have been made about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which often find that lower performers tend to overestimate themselves. However, there have also been many studies showing that the Dunning-Kruger pattern can be mostly attributed to statistical artifacts. Studies that use better methods still find some overestimation by low performers, but the effect is usually much smaller. So in short, there is often real overestimation at low skill levels, but it's usually smaller than what the Dunning-Kruger effect implies. And yes, I know, I am aware, if I got any of this wrong in the video, that would be ironic.